Hello, everybody, and welcome to Find the Helpers. I am your host, Brad Bogus.
And I am Christian Campbell.
Find the Helpers is a project. It's an experiment in mining Christians' journey through figuring out what do we do? How do we help? Like, who are the people who can guide us in how to resist fascism and authoritarianism? And what are the different ways that we might be able to engage? And so, over the course of this podcast, we are interviewing with people who are out there actively helping, either as organizers or as activists who are doing it now, currently, or have done it in the past, and give us all the blueprint with which to follow so that we can fight fascism. And speaking of fighting fascism, we're going to start this conversation on an interesting note. If you're not really that interested in sword fighting, you might want to skip forward a couple minutes. But if you would like to hear how sword fighting relates to fascism, we got you
It's not
covered.
sword fighting. It's not sword fighting. It's fencing. It's the
Hey, you got
difference.
it. You got
You
to use
know
some
it
baiting
is.
keywords here. We got to interest them. You know what I'm saying? Yes, we are talking about fencing. This is a really rare moment in my life, at least, where I get to nerd out with two other people who actually are fencers. It's like I studied fencing back in college because I was in theater and I had to do some phys ed, and they were like, "We suggest you do something that's related to your degree, so try fencing." And I actually got into it and like competed collegiately in foil fencing specifically, and then we found out that our guest today also is a fencer, and I talked to Christian about it. Turns out Christian's a fencer.
Yep. I think it's let's not build walls, let's fence more. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
gonna be the name of this episode. Less
No
walls,
walls, just
more
fences.
fencing.
Yeah, you got into it also because of theater, right?
It was for theater, yeah. And my father also did fencing through theater as well. So we actually have I fenced with his foil that he fenced with when through college, and now that foil now sits upon the mantle at our cottage with the mask with
Yeah.
our fencing
Is
mask
that is
beside
that
it,
one of
and the
those
kids
like
play
those
with it all
like
the time.
traditional long handles with the little like rubber stopper at the end?
Oh no no no! Mine's got it's formed to
You got
your
the pistol
hands,
grip?
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Dude, the
great.
pistol grip, the pistol
Yeah,
grip.
yep, yep.
I used to love those. When I got into fencing, flicking was really big, where you like, get the sword to go around someone's back and shoulder. And so those pistol grips were really good for that.
Yeah. So basically, fencing was our MMA. Let's just put it that way. It's our
That
jujitsu. It
that's a
was
good
our
point.
thing.
That's a good point.
Right.
For
It
actors,
is.
it's
Right.
our this is our jujitsu.
Ta-da! Yeah, that'll be really handy. It's going to come in
That's
real
right.
handy.
That's right. Yeah. This is how you fight the military, folks, is with a foil,
Yeah.
with a very bendy little sword that doesn't have a
And
sharp
then,
edge. If you don't know
and
fencing, there's no sharp edges.
yeah. And then if
Yeah.
you fight them that way, then you get to hear them say, Drats, foiled again. Oh, dad joke. Dad joke.
Touche. Um,
Touche. Let's get the
Yes.
hell out of
If
this
you guys
subject
hear the
now.
word touche, that's the origin is
Yep.
from fencing. So,
Hmm.
so I want to introduce our guest so that he can talk to us a little bit about fencing as well. For anybody out there who actually is a fencer, none of us are great. We're like amateur at best. Like when I say like I competed collegiately, I don't mean like at a very high level. I was not Olympian status at any way. But today we are joined by Markus Batchelor, and Marcus is an activist, organizer, and former elected from Congress Heights, D.C., representing Ward 8. He got his start as an advocate for DC statehood, and he's currently the national political director for People for the American Way. And he's an epee fencer, right? What's up,
Yeah,
Marcus? Thanks for coming to
exactly.
the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is it's great. Yeah, I am a very amateur epee fencer. I've taken like three cycles of lessons, and I don't know why. It just was a random quirk of mine. For some reason, through my entire youth, I've been just fascinated by weird sports. Like I used to get up super early in the morning and watch every stage of the Tour de France live when I was younger. Just one of those random
Yeah.
things. And so I got older and I was just like, well, I want to be physically active, but I'm tall but have none of the athletic ability in terms of like
Yeah.
playing any sport that's like contact or with any skill. So I was like, all right, well, fencing seems like some good exercise. I had seen it on the Olympics. I thought it was really cool. And so, like, my quirky self just pursued that. And then I realized, well, I also had another advantage because I'm left-handed. And so, even though,
Uh,
like, there you go. Exactly.
Hmm.
Only like 10%
Hmm.
of the world population is left-handed, but like
Hmm.
That's
four
right.
in 10 fencers are left-handed, and
Mhm.
have a
That's interesting.
really strategic advantage
Hmm.
in fencing. So,
Yep.
Fencing lefties is hard as a righty. It is
yeah,
definitely a total
exactly.
trip because like your swords are on the same side. You're like, what? What do I do?
Exactly. We lefties
We know
love
what to
that.
do. We know.
Exactly.
Y'all are used to it.
Yep,
Yep.
Yeah.
exactly. It's great.
Yeah.
I just I'm really oddly nerdly excited about the fact that you are into fencing. It's just such a random thing. Like so few people can relate to me on this. And like I have this like I can totally admit the cringe here at this point because I'm so far away from it. But like when I was really trying to get my first professional career started, it was in like video production and I was broke and just like needed money to make rent. And so I took this weird job and if I had seen where the internet was going, I probably wouldn't have taken this weird little gig. But they needed experts to record videos of their expertise for like the early, internet video, training world. And I did some fencing videos because I was like, nobody's going to be recording fencing videos. And I'm a collegiate competitive fencer, so that makes me an expert. And I very badly taught 10 episodes of fencing over what was called Expert Village. And then Expert Village got bought by another company. And then SEO happened. And because of the age of this video and the SEO around it, like there's a lot of it won't go away. I can't get rid of those videos. They exist. And I am saying them publicly now so I can, bereave myself of needing to get rid of them. And like if y'all want to go take a laugh at me, please
I'm
do.
definitely
Find me on
finding them
YouTube.
after this. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Brad, welcome to
Yes.
my early acting career. Don't worry. The
Right.
Yes.
shame, it builds scars, and those scars will help you.
They haunt you like ghosts, right? Yeah. My favorite part about this whole thing is that like people got into fights in the comments like over these videos. Like people who know fencing are like, this is shit.
Yeah.
And people who don't know fencing were like, this guy's helpful. And I had defenders and opposition, and it was yeah, it was really something. So you can go have a laugh at my behest if you like.
I'm going
Definitely.
to.
Definitely. Link in the comments,
Yes.
guys.
Yeah,
Link in the
exactly.
comments.
Vince, cut that in right now.
Right.
Shit. Shit. All right. So let's steer out of fencing for a moment and let's
Mhm.
talk, Marcus. I was watching an Instagram video recently and there was a woman going off about how, we're not resisting fascism any further. We are in fascism and we need to organize and we need to be active. And what she kept saying is everyone needs to organize. And I don't know, I understood the intent, but the message
Mhm.
rang hollow because I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, first off, everyone needs to organize, and like, what do we need to organize? Like, it was like, everyone needs to organize, everyone needs to do something.
Mhm.
And part of what we're here to explore on this podcast is like, what is the something? Organize what? Who
Yeah.
should organize? So I'd love to know, since you've been doing this, most of your life now, what does it mean to organize? What was she talking about? I mean, you probably can't speak to her, in
Yeah.
particular, but like in general, what was she trying to say, and what do you think people need to know about this so that they can understand how to get active?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
can
I
a
mean,
follow-up question? One follow-up question. And what's the difference between an activist and an organizer?
yeah, I mean, I think that is a perfect addition to that question. I mean, I think people really see organizing as this big thing. Like I've got to organize a march, or I've got to like organize a meeting, or I've got to like be the leader kind of in whatever space I'm in.
Like create a political
But
party,
yeah, exactly. But
right?
the real I think essence of what people are trying to say when they say all of us have to do something is that all of us have to find our place, right? Do our little bit in the places where we can, right? To do the most good, whenever we can. And that's not going to be the same for everybody. Some of
Yeah,
us have the privilege of time and resources that allows us and quite frankly requires us to spend more time organizing and resisting and doing those things. But for, people who are saying, I work three jobs, or I've got, three kids who I've got to take care of, or I've got two kids and an elderly mom, and that doesn't allow me to
right.
go to the marches or be at the meetings. What organizing means is to find community right in this time. In that fascism really does thrive off of isolation, right? The fact that people think that they're disconnected from communities, the fact that people think that their vote doesn't count, the fact that people think that their government won't work in their interests no matter how hard they try, that thrives in kind of isolation. But when you find community, when you find like-minded people who share the same views you do, who are willing to work towards the same goals, and who've got a variety of skills that together can help, right, advance that end. I think that's
Mm,
the most powerful tool that we can find in whatever way we can find it. So whether it's, being on a weekly call, right, that you can get on while you're putting your kids to bed, or whether it's, spending a Saturday going to with your kids to a parents group that's talking about local activism and the things that you could do, to help from your school community or from the neighborhood. All of those things are super important. And to the second question about, I think the difference between an activist and an organizer, and I think they're both equally important in kind of the active, in the organizing space or in the movement space. But an activist is somebody who creates a moment. And I think we need folks like that, right? Folks who go to the marches, folks who create civil disobedience, folks who create and drive the news cycle to get our certain
yeah.
issue out. Organizers are the people on the back end, and quite frankly, most of the time on the front end, who take
Right.
advantage of those moments, right? Who leverage the news cycle to advance an agenda, who bring coalitions together, right, to lobby or to, introduce bills or to, get the park that you've been complaining about actually built, right? Get it
Yeah,
through the
yeah.
permitting process, all of those things. And so, all of those things are important, but we've got to realize that in a world where kind of attention is currency, there are a lot of people who want to be activists, right? Who want to create a moment and oftentimes
Yeah.
their moment. But we need more organizers, right? Folks who are willing to lean in and do the real meaningful work. And again, that doesn't have to be big, but everybody does have to do something.
Sure, sure. So, if you're listening out there and you don't know, okay, I want to be one or the other, what do you think is the best way for someone to determine whether they should be involved on the organization level, whether that's running something or just being
Mhm.
involved within a system, or whether they're better fit for the moment? Like, how do you differentiate between those two things as a person?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think I've been a little bit of both. I've I got my start as a statehood activist. I think, I was arrested for the first time when I was a couple months after my 18th birthday in a protest at the White House, demanding at the time that President Obama not throw DC under the bus. Um,
Yeah.
passing the budget while also restricting the right for us to protect reproductive health for poor women in DC. Um, but then kind of fell into the organizing space, after, getting arrested for something I believed in. I was like, well,
Yeah.
what can I do after that? And so at GW, founded the DC Statehood Student Association with just a group of my friends who I convinced about statehood from Florida and New York and all of those things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we organized other people and then turned that organization into more moments. Got arrested again at the Capitol with more students. And so I think it's all cyclical, right? I think we go from moment to movement. And I
From
think
moment
we
to
all have to
movement.
find our
I
space.
like
It's
that.
about, yeah, it's about what your talent is. I think that there are people, and I think we all know friends who are really good at creating the moments in our lives. And then I think we
Yeah.
know our friends who are the organizers. They're the friends who will make the vacation fun, but there are also friends who will make the vacation happen. And those are two different those are two different types of people.
Oh man, that is probably the perfect way, like the perfect shorthand for whether you should be an organizer or an activist.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're boots on the ground right now in DC, right? This is why one of the prime reasons we have you here today. So what's working? What isn't? with troop deployments. And is anyone taking note? And is there any communication with potential future cities like Chicago, Denver, Philly, New York, who might be sort of on the pointy end of the stick of fascism anytime soon? Is there a playbook that you're learning right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to preface that, I mean, these are not normal times. I think
Mm-mm.
we're all just uniquely as a American society dealing with these things as they come. And I don't think there's any blueprint for the moment that we're in right now. I don't think any one of us would have thought like January 6th would happen and that we would be like facing a real existential crisis. I
Yeah.
think by the second time around, probably most of us knew, with Project 2025, going out that they were going to move quickly to dismantle like many of the levers of democracy and free speech and
Yeah.
balance of power that I think we rely on, some by law, some just by custom, right? And a lot of those are falling apart. And so it's hard to organize in that space. DC residents, I think, are more used to it than most, having the federal presence in the city pretty consistently. And because of our lack of full home rule, the federal government oftentimes being the target of our protests. And
Yeah.
so I think, we're used to it more than most, but these are more tenuous times, right? The president has threatened to use more force against protesters, but I think it's forced us to just organize more carefully, right? Make sure
Mhm.
that the things that we do are well organized, right? To make sure that all the folks there are well aware of their rights when interacting with federal officers and police, putting pressure on our local leaders to also protect our rights. And so I think, it's a lot of trial and error, but I think we are hoping to set a blueprint for other cities in terms of a vehement resistance to this occupation, right? Not
Yeah.
treating it as normal, not treating it as positive for public safety, carrying that narrative.
Yeah.
But also showing that, also pressuring our leaders to stand up for us. And I think you see mayors around the country
Mhm.
being more forceful in their rhetoric because of what they're
Right.
seeing on the streets in DC.
Just on that point, I'm perplexed, not being from DC or having even really spent much time there. So, like, keep in mind, my DC knowledge is very minimal. But Mayor Muriel Bowser basically just acquiesced to Trump and these deployments to collaborate, to work together for as long as they decide to be there. Which I think a lot of people like myself just saw that news headline and were like, what the fuck just happened? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
can you give us some inside baseball there, like, as to what led that decision? I mean, because you just said mayors are starting to stand up, but like this one particular mayor does
Right.
not seem to have, right, in this one very important place. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really strange dichotomy, and I think it's confusing for sure. A lot of activists on the ground. I think if you ask the mayor, she will say that I think she's playing with the hand that she's been dealt. I think
Mm-hmm.
she's tried to be vocal about just our lack of home rule. That I think she's tried to say that if she was any other mayor in any other city, she would probably
Yeah,
act differently. But just because of our lack of home rule, this is kind of the hand she's been dealt. But I think there are many people on the ground, me included, who believe that the message she's muddied the message in terms of
yeah,
the tone that activists are trying to set on the ground. I think we've been really forceful about, I think, our want for the federal government to be involved as little as possible
right.
in our public safety systems, but in our lives in general, which is our, ultimate call for statehood. And so, but to kind of see the mixed messaging where it's like, all right, well, we'll work with them this day and I'll go to the meetings and I'll go to the Oval Office. But then, it's really weird.
Yeah, it almost
And
like it almost validates the claim that crime is so bad in DC that the National Guard deployment was justified, which is, yeah, I guess that's the muddying of the message you're talking about. Yeah.
Right, and it bleeds, and I think it bleeds from I think the real conversation that other cities, and I think this is probably something that other cities should look at as this starts to come to their communities is I think it bleeds from this hyper-local conversation all cities are having about the right approach to public safety, right? I think that a lot of activists on the ground, a lot of folks in the community will say that the path to public safety is real investment, right, in housing and public schools and jobs and
Yeah.
economic opportunity. And I think there are people who will say, and I think the mayor has been pretty consistent on this as well, is that there's really nothing more useful than a fully staffed police department. And I think that she is right, artfully used this like tete-a-tete with the president, who clearly has like beefed up rhetoric around public safety in the district to meet her own local political ends, which is really just to get more police officers on the street. And so I think as we think about progressive activists on the ground who may be dealing with less progressive mayors. I don't think you have that in the case of cities like Baltimore, for instance, or Chicago. But in
Sure.
other cities, you might have more right-leaning mayors, even if they're Democrats, who, right, may
Yeah.
welcome, right, a few more, boots and badges on the street. And I think progressive activists should think of really keenly about how they address that internal political battle. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems this question of statehood really makes DC its own unique, specific exception to how every other city is going to be dealing with this.
Yeah, and I mean, and they'll try, and I think the ongoing battle after this 30-day emergency, I think, will demonstrate even how more unique the district is. I mean, there are already, I think, half a dozen pieces of legislation introduced by Republicans to take away DC's autonomy kind of beyond this period, right? To
Mm.
extend the president's authority to commandeer the police department from 30 days to 180 days, to end our sanctuary city policies, to,
Like
you
he just
know,
wants a federal city. He wants it to be his
yeah.
city.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they want to create a multi-million-dollar security fund for the district that would put more federal officers on the street. And so and there's nothing the district can do about it. We don't have any members of the House or Senate who can vote on our behalf, and so we are kind of, so we're kind of at the whim of a Congress we didn't elect, and unfortunately, right now it's a MAGA
Mm.
majority.
Man.
It's interesting. It really brings a focus to states' rights in an entirely new way for people to understand just the importance, right?
Yeah, it's baffling that the party of small government is willing to have such a heavy hand in local politics here, but
Oh,
Y'all,
I mean,
I'm thinking that the new left is going to be states' rights.
right.
Like, what is happening?
It's a full circle moment.
oh yeah.
Right.
I mean, the new left is going to be 2A all the way.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, right.
I mean, to a certain extent, the old left was, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm curious about this too, as it relates to effectively organizing against the guard.
Hmm.
Um, is the show of intent of force the show of the threat of violence from the people towards the government, right? And so, like, you could think about, turn back the clock to the Panthers, right? Like the open carry demonstrations they used to do to show their own power and their own ability to fight for themselves was a very powerful moment in that movement, which then drew a lot more support towards MLK amongst the people who were not about that level of show of violence. And those both worked in such great harmony at that time.
Hmm.
I'm wondering right now in this moment if when we organize against the guard, when we protest against the guard, whether it's in DC or, eventually when it comes to Denver or Philly or New Orleans or all the other places, Chicago, all the other places he's threatening to go, um, do we need to think in very outwardly nonviolent terms as it relates to how we protest, how we show up, how we dress, how we, you know what I mean? Like how we comport ourselves at protests? Or is it still now the time to show that we will fight for ourselves? Whether I don't mean like attacking people, but I do
Mhm.
mean, kind of like the Panthers used to, like showing up in a very extreme way. Does
Mhm.
doing that right now give Trump and, the people of the United States this like space where they can agree with guard deployments because they're afraid of the threat of violence in these blue cities where people are showing up with, maybe guns or whatever, or looking like black bloc?
Mhm.
I have all these thoughts going in my head. Like, is now the time to be like that? Is now the time to be like kumbaya and like make it so like we're almost recreating the Edmund Pettus Bridge, protest where you just literally don't fight back at all? Like,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts there on how we need to actually be organizing against the guard in these deployments?
Yeah. So I'm definitely a disciple of nonviolence. I often tell people like I grew up off of Martin Luther King Avenue. I went to a school named after Martin Luther King. My barbershop was named after Martin Luther King, next to a beauty salon named after Coretta Scott King.
Mm.
And so
You got a
I
money
got a
wall
lot of
behind you, I
right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and a bust. I'm a very
Mhm.
I I do think that nonviolence is a powerful tool against fascism. And I think they're not just the examples here in the United States through the civil rights movement or through the Black Lives Matter movement, but also international examples of resistant nonviolence. It's just been a powerful movement tool, and I think it still is. Um, uh, I think to your point, we do, however, undermine like the um, parallel movement of armed self-defense that also happened during the civil rights movement and all of these things. That was the counterbalance to that narrative. I think that the threat of political violence is definitely more real than it's ever been. If, whether you think about it on the right with these groups that clearly, right, attack the Capitol, were threatening to assassinate members of Congress, the assassination of state legislators,
Yep.
in Minnesota this year. That threat is real. Friends of mine who are elected around the country having death threats, having armed people show up outside of their homes, them
Right.
themselves talking for the first time, very, progressive friends of mine talking about being armed right for the first time
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
because of self-defense. Those are real things, and I think we all need to think about um, how we um, how we protect ourselves because a tenet of fascism is that violence is not bad, as a political means.
Yeah.
And I think Trump has demonstrated that he's willing to tolerate violence if it advances his means. But again, as in movement work, it is about keeping holding the center on your messaging. And so, if we present in a way that then affirms, right, his ability to act aggressively or act more violently, then I think we only do ourselves more harm. So I think there's a balance, but the tactics of nonviolence I think are still a firm tool in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you say something you kept calling it the threat of violence, and it's not the threat of violence anymore. It is outward violence now. But
Hmm.
because it's spaced in such a way
Yeah.
and becomes just one headline a couple of days apart, it then just it kind of resets back to threat, and
Yeah.
then it happens, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
resets back to threat, and
Yeah.
we're in this
Yeah.
almost like this strange way that they just keep us going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we are in violence. Yeah, I think frontline tactics is what you're talking about, peace for sure. But there needs to be at some point some organizing that happens on the back end. It's almost like another regiment behind, not
Mhm.
physically, but known that is ready to activate should things get ugly. Because yeah, I 100 fascists are looking for an excuse to go full fascism and to use full violence. They're looking, he's prodding right now these cities for
Right.
an inciting moment, which he can point all cameras to on one city block and say the whole city's exploded like he did in Los Angeles, and then use that to then go to the next city and to the next city and to the next city
Yeah.
and to take away more and more rights. 100% agree with that. But then I also see from the other side those who are now, yeah, like you said, progressive friends. I myself, I just moved to Canada about 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. I moved back to Canada. I'm originally from there. But before I left, I was talking to friends, very progressive friends, about joining liberal gun clubs, and just
Mhm.
not even about owning a gun, but understanding it so that in time of duress, when I need to understand it, I will be ready to use it. That
Mhm.
this type of thinking, and I could see that happening. And I
Mhm.
thought it was the right type of thinking because that they will just keep going. They will keep going, and they will use violence all the way. And every day it'll feel like we've gone back to peace, and then a little more violence will happen. The Civil War is
Mhm.
here.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's here. But it's never
Yeah.
going to look like the Civil War that we've all been taught in school. It's going to be an entirely different kind of Civil War now. And so that's what they're playing with. They're like, this is going to be a slow pot boiling kind of Civil War.
That's right.
So yeah, it's where to strike that balance, and who are the people that are organizing, almost like in hockey parlance, who are the enforcers who aren't going to go out there and actually spin things up in the peaceful protests, but they're going to be there as a presence to say, if you fuck with them, they
Hmm.
are there.
Yep.
Who are those
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, and I think to your point, I think those groups exist and they're becoming more prevalent now. I think
Yeah.
about one of my good friends, Sarah Anthony, who's a state senator in Michigan who received multiple death threats a few years ago. She's the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Black woman senator, and so was obviously just getting a lot of threats around the time where this plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer was also
Right. Right.
boiling. And she, was under real threat and armed, Second Amendment armed resistance group, mostly black men, escorted her into the state capitol every day for days. To one, show solidarity, but I think also to send that message, right, that violence won't be tolerated and that there are folks there to protect her. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. These
yeah.
if this is your flavor, it ain't mine, but if it's your flavor, there are a number of different groups that are popping up. The Huey P. Newton Gun Club is one in particular, named after the founder of the Black Panthers that organizes around 2A and, probably is one of the groups that maybe showed up to help Governor Whitmer at that time. But there are others out there, socialist gun clubs and stuff. That might be your deal. It's not mine, but like I feel this tension that exists here, between the idea of we are giving them what they want and we are letting them silence us in this one particular very important way. And it's kind of hard to figure out where I fall on that issue. You know what I mean? I just like it's always been hard for me to figure out where I fall on the 2A issue because I've recognized how important and valuable it has been for Black communities to organize around staying armed and having gun rights. And it's made it a difficult issue to understand. I just want to make sure that we are not censoring ourselves from what can be very important work and useful work and necessary work, but I also don't want to feed them the content they need to be able to go full fascist. And that seems right now to be like a very delicate balance that people have to figure out where you fit in and how to really manage that. But one of the things Christian and I were talking about on our last episode was just how effective it seems to be in the UK, where people are using very, very nonviolent protest forms, including ragdolling their bodies and like literally not even fighting against the police, just going dead weight and delivering very succinct, very powerful messages in that moment of arrest. And that is really using, I think, a very effective way at nonviolent protest that we could be using right now too. Like when you're when the fascists are looking for content to say, look it, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is the crime we've been talking about. This is the violent left we've been talking about.
Mhm.
When you're dressed like a banana or when you go limp with your body, like it's hard for them to be taken seriously. You know what I mean? So like, I feel like there's this sort of that we can diffuse this in a way by being extremely nonviolent on the front lines. But it does seem
Oh,
like the threat in the background is still valuable to some extent.
yeah, and I think I think there was always, I think, a prevailing narrative, even though to both of you all's point, it was kind of an undertone, but there was always this perception that Black communities, close knit at the time, right? Close knit by virtue of being isolated, especially in the Deep South, were
Right.
also willing to defend themselves, right? The Ku Klux Klan knew that you couldn't just come into a Black town and kind of wreak havoc in most cases without, finding armed resistance from the men in the community, right? Fannie Lou
Yep. Yep.
Hamer, icon, right, of the nonviolent civil rights movement, also said she kept a rifle in every corner of her house. And,
Right. Right.
and the first person who came to attack her wouldn't write their mama again, right? And so,
Mm.
these narratives and those tensions, especially in times like this in our country, do embody both of those things, right? I think people committed to nonviolent resistance in many cases, again, are committed to that work, but not unintelligent, right? That folks would rather live for the things that they believe in than die for them. And I
Certainly.
think you saw kind of the tension of that, in those movements. And I think you're seeing that tension build among folks who are organizing on the ground today. Yeah.
Kind of feels like we're in some parallels, right? Like
Mhm.
history is rhyming quite a bit right now.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very different. I've been organizing on the ground since I was 15, pretty confidently, getting arrested and kind of doing these things that, again, at the time I thought were pretty brave. But again, I think, yeah, feeling closer to those folks in the civil rights movement who knew that they were taking these risks and taking these public stances, and that government or that those institutions might not look out for their safety, right?
Yeah.
Might abuse them with impunity, right? Might take their lives, is a very different risk, that I think more activists are having to deal with today.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to have us talk a little bit more about what other cities can start to do to prepare and protest and organize ahead of time. But before we
Mhm.
do that, we want to toss to our helper highlight. And this is our opportunity to highlight people out there in the community who are actively helping people in various ways, whether that's through organization or activism or other ways that they may be helping. And we're going to have producer Vince tell us the helper highlight this week. Producer Vince has been crisscrossing the United States through the Midwest, producing These American Crossroads, which highlights these really amazing stories in places you just don't get to hear about in terms of who is resisting in these red states, in these Midwest states that aren't the target of the major mainstream media's eye.
For this week's Helper Highlight, I want to talk about an organization called Popular Democracy. They're a nationwide organization that assists in planning protests and facilitating intentional acts of civil disobedience, including intentionally being arrested to stand up for your principles. I've covered them in the past, and my most recent experience with them was with the Free State Advocates, a coalition of 9 Kansas political action groups that traveled to DC this week to get into some good trouble, and they did. They staged a sit-in in the Dirksen Senate cafeteria, which is the Dirksen Senate building is where a good number of our senators do their actual work. It's where their offices are located. Did you know that it's not inside the Capitol? And they disrupted lunch, and they protested cuts to the housing and urban development in the proposed appropriations bill, which is being voted on before the end of this month to avoid a government shutdown. And rather than me over explain it, I made a little clip and put it on my socials. You can follow them for sure and always be the first to know about all this stuff. But let's go watch that. Love y'all.
All right, thanks, producer Vince. That is good stuff out of DC. And like everybody else in these United States, we have to pay our bills on this show. So we'd like to feature this ad from our great partner, Root for Hemp.
Root for Hemp is on a mission to put hemp in hands for everyday household and lifestyle needs, because we know that when you put hemp in hands, it opens minds. We are proud to support Find the Helpers Pod.
That's a form of resistance. Building with hemp,
It's
creating
true.
with hemp,
It's
manufacturing with
true.
hemp is its own form of resistance. It could save the
That's right.
planet.
It
Yep.
can. It really can. Like I'm not even like
Really
getting paid
can.
to say that. It's like
No.
really,
No,
it's
no,
really true.
that is so scientifically backed up. It's like right there in front of us. Utilizing hemp in our industrial complex could literally save civilization.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm saying it.
We can
Yep.
build fireproof homes with this
So
shit,
do the
guys. Come
do
on now.
do the research.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hemp
Yeah.
Read the
saves.
books. All right, Marcus.
Yeah.
I think the prevailing anxiety on a lot of our minds in blue cities that are not DC or LA is that we know the guard is showing up sometime soon, right? I've heard organizers say we got about 2 weeks, really. So by the time this episode hits, you guys, we might have under 2 weeks to prepare for this. It may happen faster, it may happen a little later, it may stagger, right? But one of us is going to be deployed in the next 2 weeks. So how can organizers and activists in cities like Denver or New Orleans or Philly or wherever else, Chicago, how can they start to prepare for when this happens so that when it does, they're able to make the best use of it from an optics perspective? They're able to foment the best resistance for it ahead of time, get people ready to be active. And are there any moves before all that takes place that can happen to bolster the city, whether it's talking to representatives or working with local organizers? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I would tell local activists to not stick your head in the sand on this issue. I think there were a lot of folks on the ground and in leadership here in the district who did that, frankly, who just kind of stuck their
Mm.
heads in the sand and took Trump's threats as just kind of a random quip on Air Force One or a joke.
Like
But
they
he
believed
had
that
been
there was some system that was going to protect that from actually happening.
Exactly. But he had been saying since the campaign trail that he wanted to tackle the public safety issue in the district, that he wanted to take over the district government and have it run by the federal government. And so people should take those threats seriously and begin organizing now, begin anticipating the threats to our rights, to our freedoms, to our freedom of movement when it comes to organizing, because all of those things are very real. And so getting folks acclimated to what their rights are, right, when it comes to interactions with federal officials is going to be really important. Oftentimes they will differ from kind of interactions with local or state police that activists in your communities might be familiar with. And so educating folks ahead of time on that threat, I think, is important. Beginning the pressure on your local leaders to stand up when this threat comes or as it comes, to be resistant, not just in their actions, but also in their rhetoric, and get them in line with what folks on the ground are trying to push. Um, find communities of safety and security. I think for our undocumented neighbors, right? For folks who might be more susceptible to negative police interactions, right? Making sure that we wrap our arms around our Black communities, our migrant communities, in a way that steals them from, I think, what can be a more aggressive response than white folks, quite frankly, in our
Yep.
community. And I think that folks with more privilege, right, more time, more resources, more money have done a great job at like standing out front in this movement, knowing that other folks in our community were more susceptible to being arrested, to having right
Yeah.
more negative consequences inflicted on them. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of this freedom of movement is that again, know your rights, know, what you're allowed to do, right? Stand up for those abilities because what an overpresence of troops will try to do is make you think that you can't protest, that you can't walk around, right, the streets that your tax dollars pay for freely, that you can't organize or gather in groups. And that is not the case. And so continue to do that, continue to affirm your right to the First Amendment. And then again, just continue to stay peaceful. Again, knowing that the president is looking for this provocation anywhere to do this everywhere, we all need to be really beating from the same drum and reading from the same sheet on how we organize around the country. So also, find networks of folks around the country who are experiencing the same things that you are.
I feel like the point of fascism often is fear, and it seems like what Trump is doing now in everything that he's doing is creating an environment of fear. And then that fear makes people afraid to speak out, losing jobs, losing we're now feeling very conscious about what we say online, or at least many people are. What do you have to say to people when it comes to fear, facing that fear, and courage throughout any kind of protest? Yeah, if you're talking about movements that you've probably studied in the past,
Mhm.
what are there any recommendations on that of how to find your courage?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I don't think there's anything better that helps you overcome fear other than community, right?
Yeah,
Solidarity,
yeah,
knowing that you're not alone, right, in this
yeah,
work. And, as, I'm sure we've all been to our fair share of protests. We just know that being among that group, right, knowing that you're not alone, knowing that, they can't take all of us, they can't abuse all of us without, right, without some type of accountability or sight, I think is or spotlight, I think is really important. Um, but I think but I think that fear is more real than it's ever been before. Like I said
yeah.
earlier, protesting when I was a teenager during the Obama administration, or even during the first Trump administration, um, um, felt more safe, quite frankly,
Yeah.
than it does now. And I think that that is the point. And I think all of us are going to have to find our boundaries. But I think those of us who are committed to this work are asking ourselves more frequently, what more are we willing to sacrifice to advance this message, to resist, knowing that this is it, right? Knowing that this is kind of the line for democracy or dictatorship, and what are we willing to sacrifice to save democracy? And those are not easy questions. And quite frankly,
No.
Donald Trump will require folks who resist him to sacrifice more, given his immense power and authority. And so I think for all of us thinking about that, it is a good question. What are we willing to sacrifice? And, that in a way that's most impactful to our goals.
Yeah. It's a tough
It's a
one too,
powerful
right? When
question.
you've got the DNC and the Demo and the Liberal Party basically more unpopular than Donald Trump right now.
Yeah.
It's what are people willing to risk for? What are
Mhm.
they willing to
Yeah.
risk their lives for, or risk the comfort of their lives for?
Mhm.
When what are they fighting for? What messages are they fighting for? Is that something you're finding right now in organizing? How are you weaving that right now in terms of organizing around message?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think all of us are trying to move more carefully. I think, while we're also asking the question what we're willing to sacrifice, I think you know, the right and Donald Trump are trying to really get leftist activists for nothing, right? You see how he's using the law,
Yeah.
both on kind of frontline protesters, but also against Democratic elected officials, to advance his means to intimidate people, to silence them. And so I think that'll continue to happen. And so, those are really that's a really tough again situation to be in. But I think calling that out, right, showing that he's using these levers to do things, I think is important. Because he'll use it um um to fit his narrative, but I think the counter narrative to all of these fascist things he's doing is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the fear is here to make us comply in advance.
Yeah.
And that's in some way a little bit of that muddying of the message with Mayor Bowser, which is an unfortunate outcome. But that complying in advance is a pesky phrase that comes up in every one of our episodes.
Hmm.
It's like a common theme about how fascism rears its head, about its effect on the populace to quiet us, and about our fear of what those consequences are if we were to actually engage and fight back against it, right? And it wants you to feel it's an inevitability. And it's hard not to feel that way. You know what I mean? We don't see really DNC opposition power happening in any real way. We see Gavin Newsom trolling Trump online, which is great. That feels good, I guess. But
Right.
like, the redistricting effect is like, okay, that's great if we have elections, but like it feels like the DNC has just across the board failed to take this as seriously as they needed to, and people now just feel this sense of inevitability around this. And I think that inevitability is part of the intention to make us
Mhm.
comply in advance. But what you said about we have to start thinking about what we need to sacrifice, like I've heard that said before, and I don't know that it's ever really resonated with me like it does right now, because like right now we're like in it. You know what I mean? There's never been a battle fought in the history of the world where the people didn't sacrifice something, and certainly not a revolution, which is kind of feeling like where we're at. But I think the other insidious part of fascism beyond the fear is the convenience. Like, there's so much convenience in our society right now that people don't want to give up. Right? This is going to be the main struggle amongst white folks. Like, how do we, Christian and Brad, get other white folks to say we're going to stop ordering next day on Amazon and start sacrificing some shit? You know what I mean? Like
Oh
maybe
God,
putting
it's so
ourselves in
hard
the
being a rebel these days.
I
Right.
know, because like, how am I going to overnight, all the things
Right.
that I could just buy in my community? What am I going to do?
Mhm.
Uh, the
God.
white folks have to come up. Like we have to like call our people in and to do this work. And
Yeah.
the hardest effort we're going to wage in that is going to be getting white people to give up conveniences. And I think it's
Yeah.
starting to happen with the boycotts, right? Like we saw some really powerful, effective boycotts happening that certainly required white folks to be a part of for them to have had their enormity, like on Target. But it's that sacrifice bit that feels like a lot of people are struggling with, like realizing that this is actually really the moment, right? And they're not just being told this by people who are hysterical and being
Mhm.
hyperbolic.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if
Which,
we've gotten soft to the message of this is Nazism, but like,
right.
maybe Godwin's law has made us all a little too comfortable with that term, and we don't really realize the level of that we're actually in.
Yeah, but to Christian's point, it's the kind of drip drip of these controversies that kind of lull us to it, right? I think, we're all kind of expecting this big moment to kind of draw us into action, right? That,
Yeah, right.
suddenly like Trump's gonna get up on TV tomorrow morning and say, I'm a dictator now, and then we're all just kind of gonna take to the streets. And it's like, no,
Yeah,
he's
right.
kind of already won now. And the media and, kind of, the Democratic Party still treating him like, any old president. And it's just like, well,
Yeah.
no, this is this is a real threat. And so it is hard to say what will like, and I think I don't think we are uh I want to push back on that. I don't think we're completely sleep to it. I think that Trump's abuses of power have incited for a fact the largest kind of demonstrations in American
Yeah. No,
history.
that's fair.
But there is still this gap for sure where people aren't really recognizing that our institutions, with Trump or not, are going to be broken for a generation. And
Yeah.
what the aftermath looks like, I think is also going to be important. So, I mean, I think the one thing is like, yeah, what do we do to resist Trump? And I think the Democrats, even though they don't have that message yet, are focused on that. I think what they're not focused on, and I think what the American people are looking for, is what happens after. What America are we going to build after, right? If we know the Supreme Court is broken, if we know the
Yeah.
Congress is ineffectual, if we know the president is all too powerful, if we know the Supreme Court, or, if we know all of these
Yeah.
institutions, right, are irrevocably flawed, right? How are we going to change them when we get power again? And Democrats haven't answered that question. And I don't necessarily think activists on the ground have answered that question, but
Yeah.
the time for imagination in the middle of crisis is hard. But I think but I think hope is really important for people to have. And if we can work towards a new America that we can see on the other side of this, I think it helps galvanize people.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that idea. It's hard to be imaginative in the midst of the crisis. That's so true. I mean, like that plays out in people's lives when you're a low income person. It's hard to think beyond 3 days in
Mhm.
terms of financial planning or your life. Everything's reactive.
Yeah.
Everything is just survival, and that's I feel like what the movement feels like is we're in a survival moment, unable to sort of have the imagination of what happens afterwards. I love you. I'm already thinking about these things about like what happens after, and because I'm not hearing that message, I actually feel pretty despondent about the future of the United States for even after Trump is gone, even after they might be out of office. I don't know what, because with Obama, look what happened with Obama and just the amount of resistance and the things we couldn't get accomplished during that time. And with Biden, the things we couldn't get accomplished. If any Democratic person comes in, or whatever you want to describe them as, what are they even going to be able to accomplish once all these systems have sort of been kind of cauterized into the political system? Once Palantir has really gotten its clutches on our information system and our entire sort of, the police force is all integrated with that, it's going to be very difficult to decouple that because it's now become incredibly convenient. And these are the things that really, really worry me because it always, all for the 30 years that I've lived in the United States, I've only seen the United States basically going in this direction. There
Mhm.
have been moments where we go,
Yeah.
ah, yes, gay marriage. Ah, yes, we've got some Obamacare. We've got these little glimmers, but they're almost like just crumbs,
Mhm.
crumbs to keep us numb to the fact that there's a larger thing that's been going on this entire time. And that was my experience of my 30 years in the United States.
Yeah, and I mean, and to your point, in terms of folks who just don't have the time to participate, folks who don't have the time to imagine, that is becoming a far larger subset of the American population now. And not just by virtue of MAGA, but to your point, for decades, there's also been this hollowing out of the middle class, right? This
Yeah.
massive inequality, rich, the very affluent versus the very poor. And so there is also that simmering tension that clearly, like even Obama's kind of pro-bank,
Yeah.
policies in the aftermath of the recession didn't help, right, bridge that divide or the like lack of faith in institutions by kind of the working class in our systems that quite frankly don't just hold the nation up, but their participation holds democracy up. And
Right.
so, you get, a manifestation of all of those dissatisfactions over 4 decades, right? Since the Reagan administration, you get this manifested with Trump. And now to the point, a lot of folks will say, well, what's democracy worth? Right. It never put a meal on my table. It never gave me a good job. It only, sunk me in a bunch of like student loan debt that, didn't get me even the career that I was asking for. I can't buy a house. And, now Trump is saying, well, I'll come in, I'll just tear all of this broken stuff down and I'll give you what you want. And even if it's right under a dictatorship, people will be like, well, how bad could it be? And that is a dangerous point, right, in
Yeah.
a democracy where you created these divides, and it's not just the United. Well, I mean, the United, the funny thing is the United States was kind of started over a class war, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, and then you think about like France, and so when these inequalities, the consistency around history is that it's not just these kind of political or cultural disagreements that drive societies apart or sink societies. It's economic inequality that
Right.
oftentimes sinks societies, and it's been consistent in American history that when these conflicts come about, that it's economic inequality that also drives them, even in the
Yeah.
I
civil wars. Yeah,
I 100% think that the centering message from here on in for the left of center, for the center, has got to be the inequality issue. It's got to be the
Yes.
class issue. It's got to be, this isn't about democracy. This is actually about capitalism. And this is about a very small percentage of people. And they want it all. And they
mm,
don't
Yep.
care a fuck about us. And they don't even give a fuck about the planet. They're building bunkers right now all over the planet in order to prepare for what they and their AIs and the scientists and all their researchers know is going to happen to this planet and to civilization if we
Yep.
continually go at this trajectory. They're trying to figure out ways right now. These oligarchs are trying to figure out ways of where they're going to be able to keep their their underlings aligned with them after the apocalypse. Like pathetic
Yeah.
stories are coming out about this, right? It's just the cynicism is disgusting. And so I
Yeah.
think that has got to be the unifying message, because I think that's exactly where you're going to key into where Trumpism came out of. All those Trumpists, that's really their call. They feel the inequality. That's where it all came out, and that's where they can be unified. So
mm,
that's
I
my thing.
I
And
wish I could cite where I heard this, but I heard this really compelling argument that the concept of the middle class was actually created to divide us, that
yeah,
there is the working class and the owning class.
mm,
And if you think about it in those terms, all of us are united within the working class. All of us, right? It doesn't matter
yeah,
whether you make $250,000 a year or not. You're still part of the working class because you are not one of those who own $50 billion. And I think one of the interesting things about the unifying message there is that almost every American is creepily aware of the fact that their phones listen to them. And we
yeah,
know that when we talk about a certain thing, we get served ads,
yeah,
right? And like that feels weird, right? Everyone is aware of it. It's not that painful of an
right.
experience, right? So like everyone's used to it at this point. They're sort of like, oh yeah, I know my phone's listening to me and it's going to serve me ads about this. Ha ha ha. But like deep down, we're all still pretty skeeved out about that, I think,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I think there's some unification that can happen. Like right and left, our phones are listening to us and currently they're serving us ads. But what's next? Because
yeah,
when Palantir, when Peter Thiel, when this Paragon spyware out of Israel that just got a US contract, when all of those things are put together, you have oligarchs controlling us through technology and telling us what to think and telling us what we're not allowed to say. That's got to be unifying. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say Donald Trump's the problem because he's not the problem. He's just a symptom of the
symptom.
disease,
Yeah.
and he will go away, and the problem won't go away with him. We talked about
right.
this last week.
Oh
But
yeah.
I think we can all agree, and you can't, I don't even know if you can even call it capitalism because there's like these trigger words, right? But like we can all agree that like the income inequality, the owning class spying on us and using technology to control us is not something that either the left or right want. I would hope. This idea of techno fascism, you don't hear the people excited about that. You hear people like Peter Thiel excited about it, or Alex Karp excited about it, or Elon Musk excited about it. And there's not a whole lot of people who like them. You know what I mean? So,
I mean, with Palantir, it's been around for 17 years and wasn't a profitable company, and now it's worth the value of Bank of America. That's just how powerful we're talking about here.
yeah.
It's a terrifying, terrifying aspect, and it's all about class. It's all about it's consolidating that power to the top.
Yeah. One of the things that we've talked about, Christian and I, is that these soldiers that are part of the guard probably don't want to be doing what they're doing. I mean, not all of them, at least, right? You know what I mean? I'm sure most of them aren't like, oh, I can't wait to go rough up the American public. You know what I mean? Or shoot them or whatever it may be. Or I can't wait to clean up some gardens or
Right.
whatever other
Which
lawn
is
work
which
they're
is
doing right
mostly
now.
what they're doing, right? Exactly.
Right, right. So like as it relates to protesters and like cities and some of these cities that are about to see deployments, as it relates to how they engage with soldiers, are you
Mhm.
seeing any solidarity across the lines there? Are the protesters in DC effectively catching the hearts and minds of the soldiers within the guard, whether that's to remind them of their oath to the Constitution, to try to help them dissent, or just to show compassion so that those people feel less compelled to shoot them whenever they're ordered to do so? Or is it being more effective to make them miserable in this
Mhm.
deployment
Yeah.
and want to dissent because they don't like being told to do what they're doing and they don't
Yeah.
like the American public calling them a bunch of cowards? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both. I mean, in terms of the guard deployment specific to DC, a lot of them are DC National Guardsmen, and so they're our neighbors, right? I
Yeah.
saw a photo posted by the White House several weeks ago, the president advertising the deployment of the guard, and one of the guardsmen in one of the photos I went to third grade with. And so, some of these
Yeah.
folks are neighbors and they're just doing their jobs. However, there is also a deployment of folks from a lot of states,
Mhm.
mostly red
Mhm.
states, and quite frankly, federal agents who have, shown pretty candidly their disdain for the district. And I think our residents have gone out of their way to show their disdain for them. And so I think it's a little bit of both. I think you take it as it comes. I think the even the folks who have kind of taken the latter path and say, we want to, tell the soldiers to go home, we want to kind of, make their lives miserable, kind of do all of those things, have even pointed out like, hey, if these folks are wearing the DC National Guard patch, they're probably our neighbors, like chill out.
Mm.
And so I think there's been that distinction made in that folks don't, it's not that the district residents, and I think we've been making this very clear, it's not that we don't want public safety. It's not that we don't want people in our community or from our community to help keep our community safe. We don't want to be invaded, right, by people we didn't elect, by people who aren't our neighbors, by people not trained in law enforcement, to have have accountability over our freedom and our lives because it's dangerous. And so I think, we've been working hard to keep that message on the ground, but it's definitely been a mix of tactics. You've seen folks go up to guardsmen and explain why their presence is unnecessary and unwanted. And then I think you've seen whole groups chant "troops go home" at a
Yeah,
group of
right.
guardsmen. And so I think there's a diversity of tactics. I don't know if one's working better than the other, but I think people are kind of taking the approaches that work best for them.
Well, I appreciate all this insight, Marcus. This has been really incredible. We like to usually wrap up with what we call our highs and lows, where we cover either one high or one low from our last week that we really want to highlight.
Mhm.
But before we do that, I just want to, I'm going to take the Jerry Maguire approach here and say, help us help you at Find the Helpers, right? Like one of the ways that we are trying to get people activated is by giving you these playbooks from amazing folks out there like Marcus, who are out there running these playbooks on the daily, organizing with other people who have different tactics, different strategies, different ways of approaching this work. And we want to keep those conversations happening here and keep more people hearing them so we can get more feet in the street and hopefully beat back fascism faster than if we weren't. So the best way you can help us help you is like follow, like, subscribe, smash the bell, share it, our content with the people in your network, whether they agree with you or not. Right. Like one of the things is we've got to be able to organize in our communities. And that means engaging people that don't agree with us. Right. We got to get a little bit out of these silos. We have to find ways that we might be able to get good, meaningful, reasonable conversation into the hands of people who don't agree with us. We try to do a good job of that here and not be, too one-sided, but obviously we have a point and we have a perspective, and more people need to hear that perspective, particularly anyone in your family who is really MAGA right now. We all have at least one of them, I imagine. So share this, please, get it out there and help us get this out to more people. And the other thing I'll ask of you is to support independent journalism anywhere in your community. But particularly right now, you can support Yellow Scene because Yellow Scene is platforming both Find the Helpers and these American Crossroads, where Vince is going out and capturing all these amazing stories of resistance and hope from the heartlands on how people are resisting fascism and authoritarianism and ICE. And he's doing this in places that mainstream media won't go. They're not telling these stories, right? They're not embedding with activist groups heading out to DC from Kansas. But we need to hear those stories because holy shit, there are people fighting back in Kansas. There are people who have showed up 500 days in a row in Missouri. Like, there are stories out there you're not hearing, and Vince is out there telling them. So if you can support these American Crossroads, we'll be dropping a link down in the show notes where you can do that. But if you feel more compelled to support independent journalism anywhere you are, that is a very effective way to fight fascism. All right, highs and lows. Christian, let's start with you today.
I'm just going to go with a high, which is always wrapped with a low because that's just the universe. I think my high was watching what happened at Cannes Film Festival when the Hin Rajab movie premiered there. And it got a 22-minute standing ovation, which was, of course, profound. But it was, I think, the longest standing ovation anything has received at the Cannes Film
22
Festival.
minutes is wild.
That's a long time for a standing O.
Standing and clapping for 22 minutes is wild.
That is saying a lot right there. So that's my high low, but it brings up something for me. I've been working in storytelling all my life, and one thing that I noted is that with there's been so many movies I was raised on around the great sort of events around World War II. You had the all the great movies that talked about the Holocaust, whether it be Sophie's Choice. These are the movies like I saw Sophie's Choice when I was 11 years old, right? I mean this is Gen X. I saw all the movies in the 1970s and 80s that just made you go ugh about the world, right? Because I was seeing not just World War II and Holocaust movies, I was also seeing Vietnam movies. These were all the movies that were coming out at a time that were culturally digesting what hadn't quite yet been fully digested by society. And there was a lag time, especially after World War II, there was a lag time because first of all, there wasn't a lot of footage. And two, a lot of people didn't talk about this. And I know in my own personal experience with my grandfathers, one in the Dutch resistance and one, in the Scottish Rifles, they didn't want to talk about it. And the stories, I would have to pull them out. And that was a whole generation that didn't do that. So the films didn't really start coming out about World War II, really the ones that mattered, until about 10 to 15 years after, and even up to 20 years. And there was a first kind of level of the films that came out in the 1960s, and then another wave when the children of the people that experienced it, like the Spielbergs and whatnot, they started making films about the experience. And then with Vietnam, that shortened. It shortened down to around 10 to 15 year lag when you got the platoons and the people that actually fought in the wars and could actually have those profound kind of deer hunter came pretty quickly after Vietnam. But right now, what we've just seen with Hin Rajab is a movie about the genocide while the genocide is happening. We
Yeah.
have now the lag of processing and digestion for cultural and filmmakers and storytellers ready to tell these stories has gone to absolute zero.
Hmm.
And that
That's a
is something that is profoundly new. And it's
yeah.
because billions of people are watching daily it
Hmm.
happen in 4K on their phones, delivered straight to the prefrontal cortexes and to their emotion and to their amygdala. And so
Yeah.
these stories, I think, are about to come out real fast on Gaza and what's happening in Palestine, but also we're about to see films by the filmmakers who experienced the Gulf Wars, because there's not been enough Gulf War movies made, by the way.
That's right.
Ones that don't feel like propaganda, like American
Yeah.
Sniper, what a piece of utter shite that was, right? So we're about to see at the same time as the Gaza and Palestine movies and experience happen are going to co-align with the Gulf Wars, and they're absolutely and utterly connected. So I think
Yeah.
Hind Rajab is my real. I haven't seen the movie, and I can't speak to if it, what it as you know as a storytelling sort of how it goes. But I think this is a shifting time in culture, and
Yeah.
I speak out to anyone who's a filmmaker out there, storytellers, all of you out there, especially the ones who are close to this. Get out there, start telling these stories, because I promise you, Israel and the United States, the Hasbara and the propagandists and the Zionists they're going to try hard, and their stuff is going to be cringe.
Yeah.
Make good stories.
We can't let Gaza become the next Armenian genocide that we find out
No,
about 20, 30,
no,
40, 100 years
no,
later, right?
no.
Like that's it's really interesting. And we're probably going to see stories of fighting fascism in the US while we're fighting fascism. That's such a great observation. I never even I saw that story headline and it didn't even click to me that like holy shit, this is happening right now
Mhm,
and
We,
this
we
film came out right now.
mhm.
we should have known when House of Cards and Handmaid's Tale came out which direction we
Ooh.
were headed in, but
Yeah, I mean it was pretty clear, right?
Yeah, yeah,
White
right.
dark. We actually had to stop watching The Handmaid's Tale because it felt too real. And
God.
yeah, that's some real shit.
I read it in school because it's we have to read it in Canada, and so I didn't need to watch the series. I was like, yeah, all right,
Yeah,
done.
I'm good. I'm
yeah,
there. I'm already there.
when we started, when we shifted from kind of like the West Wing generation to like House of
Hmm.
Cards, like
Yeah,
Oh man.
Scandal was like that weird buffer where it was like
Right.
politics is kind of cringe and corrupt, and then it just went full bore murder, and yeah, we should
Uh-huh.
we should have known.
Should have seen that coming. I got the
Yeah,
whole West Wing box set. Sometimes my wife and I like to retreat into it, and I call it retreating because it's like, let's go into the bubble where reality doesn't exist.
so nice, so
yeah,
nice.
no.
All right, I'll hit y'all
What
with
we
my
could
low
be.
this week. And
Mhm.
normally I don't like to shit on people's cities. So like I'm sorry in advance, people of Atlantic City, but I had to go to your city this week, and man, I have a hard time in Atlantic City. Oh, I had to go there for a business conference, and just not my place. I'm sure there are people who love Atlantic City, and like I said, I'm not trying to necessarily shit on what they love. I probably miss what makes Atlantic City cool, but it is not for me. Like, first off, having to fly into Philly and then drive over an hour, like that's like $170 Uber or a real sketch train ride. Like, I know some folks who grew up in Chicago and played football who are sketched out by that train ride. I'm just a skinny kid, so like I'm not trying to get into any warfare just to get to Atlantic City. As a vegan, hard to eat there, so like yeah, kind of not exactly what I would call a fun use of 4 days of my week, but that's my low for the week. A lot
You're
of lows out
welcome,
there,
Atlantic City.
I guess.
Right.
Yeah, if you're from Atlantic City, you got some work to do,
They're
y'all,
coming
to get
back.
this.
They're coming back.
I
You know?
hear, I hear, I hear. I hope
Yeah.
so. Trump is the reason that fucking city is a piece of shit. I've heard from people there, right? So like, this isn't me just being like an outsider calling it that. Like people inside said Trump fucked up our city, and we haven't rebounded from Sandy Hook. Those are the two things I
Everything
hear.
Trump touches dies is an absolutely true statement.
I
Like
heard
every.
recently he bankrupted an airlines that early
Mhm,
on in his career that was on a skyward trajectory, no pun intended.
mhm.
And he bought it while it was on its way up, and it was a guaranteed success. But he outfitted all of the planes with wood paneling and gold trimming, and the gold and the wood weighed the planes down so much that the expenses
Their
from
fuel
gas and
costs
all of
went
that,
up.
yeah, went up. And he bankrupted it. Like this dude could bankrupt a casino, which is just insane. I heard a great Josh Johnson sketch about bankrupting casinos being the most banana sandwich fucking thing ever. But yeah,
Several in Atlantic City, by the way, to your
that's
point,
right.
like two or
That's right.
three.
That's
Yeah.
why they think Trump fucked their city up because yeah, he could take a surefire bet and ruin it.
He's going to
So
bankrupt the
anyway,
United States at this current trajectory right now. So that's
yeah,
all there is to it.
we're
If you
getting
want to
there.
talk about class disparity, he's about to create even more of it. Yeah.
So
So,
Marcus,
yeah.
high or low? Where are you at on this
Yeah.
week?
Ooh, I'll do a high. I mean, I definitely think this weekend, we had the largest kind of anti-Trump occupation protest we've had in DC so
Mm,
far. Close
that
to
footage was great.
10,000 residents came and marched down 16th Street down to the White House. It was a massive, massive turnout. But I've got to add a second high too, since we were talking about movies
That's great.
earlier. Watched Highest to Lowest by Spike Lee, and I love a good Spike Lee joint.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so that was a special treat. He always does really good movies with awesome imagery. So that was definitely a highlight of my week watching that one.
Hell yeah.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
I
down on
remember
my
when he
watch list.
I
Mhm.
remember
Yeah.
when he released when the levees broke about Katrina, and it was such a powerful, powerful series.
Mhm.
And now National Geographic has released a 5-part series on Katrina that I highly urge everyone to watch because you'll actually see also what went down during Katrina with the National Guard deployment. It's
Yes.
very relevant. And what's great about it is you also like there's a lot of despair in that story. So just like
Mhm.
gird yourself. But there's a general who was calling a lot of the shots, and the way that he ordered the guard around the community, that fucking guy. I wish he was our president, man. I
I
would I
know,
would
my
vote for
God,
that
General
fucking guy.
Honore.
General
Yeah,
Honore, that's right.
yeah,
That dude was a real one.
yeah, yeah. There's
Marcus, why don't we
there's
get
there's
a
also a
low? Oh, sorry, great. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say there's also another one that just came out on Netflix, Katrina Come Hell or High Water, and I believe at least the fourth episode of that is also produced by Spike Lee,
Oh,
in
cool.
his like very classic style. And so yeah, but the 20th anniversary retros on Katrina, I mean, I think, for those who lived through it, I mean, I get you could see the depravity and kind of how it was falling apart in the moment, but just seeing it with kind of history and time is
Yeah.
really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in Houston when all that went down, and the way the media narrative shaped how I thought what was going down was real fucked up. Like watching that documentary now, I'm like, man, I was programmed. We're
Mhm.
all so programmed. Like we don't realize it when it's happening. But
Mhm.
yeah. Marcus, I noticed also something I'm going to force you to say hello. I noticed something in your Instagram feed, and it relates to something you said early in this episode, which is that Trump is starting to try to make things illegal in DC that have always previously been legal, and one of those is this 40-year peace protest tent that has been on the White House protesting nuclear armament. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a 40-year vigil started in the late 1980s, or maybe early 1981, I believe, is when it started. But it's been a constant in Lafayette Park across the street from the White House. Protests come and go, but this one has been there, manned consistently since 1981. It's a very small tent, but it's there to, one, it's a 24/7 vigil for peace. And two, it advocates the end for nuclear war and for nuclear disarmament. Has been protected and respected by administrations of both parties for four
Yeah.
decades now. And or earlier this week, or I guess maybe it was last week, Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend, who happens somehow to also have a reporting gig,
Yeah, press credentials.
Mhm.
complained about it, and right on the spot convinced the president to, without any knowledge of what it was about, to take it down. And they called it an encampment. And as a part of the president's federally authorized effort to clear homeless encampments in the district,
Mm,
dismantled the protest. And so, a huge loss in terms of the history there. But two, just a really disgusting attack on free speech. And I think it
yeah.
shows I think that more than anything shows just like the lengths that the president's willing to go just for a photo op, you know?
Like even W was okay with that protest staying
Right.
on the lawn.
Right.
It tells you something about how far we've departed, right?
Right.
Mad respect to that person or organization who made that happen for 40 something years.
Yeah, it seems like there's a loose coalition of folks, and there's been I think just kind of a long chain of folks over the years who've and they take shifts and like you know, and they're not sleeping there. You know, the president called it a homeless encampment. There is a tent there, but there's no beds. They're not sleeping there overnight. The rules are in Lafayette Park, you have to be awake and present for it to be considered a protest, and they've maintained that by one or two people being
Wow.
there on ongoing shifts for 40 years.
Loosely
And
organized is how you refer to that. I mean, when we're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
no,
like what does it take
that's
to be
very
organized?
organized,
I
right?
mean, well,
Right,
but maybe not, right? Like
right,
maybe
yeah.
loose organization sometimes is all it takes to be able to keep a tent 24/7, man, for
Yeah.
40 something years.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure of like the organization that's specifically tied to it. But
Yeah.
back close to 15 years ago, when I was in high school, kind of came across it, just walking the mall, walking around the White House, and ended up talking to one of the guys who was manning the vigil there. And for like 3 minutes while he went to go get water at a water fountain, I got to man that vigil
That's
and kind
right.
of keep that tradition alive. So to that point, that is definitely a low this week. Seeing that vigil come down, it seems like they're back out in the park. Of course, I think without the tent and stuff like that, but yeah, but to see kind of the physical vigil be dismantled was pretty disheartening.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to just go perfectly with it's now the Department of War. Just saying it out loud. Just saying the quiet part out loud now. That's
That's
it. We're
right.
no peace. This is about war.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Crazy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Cool.
okay, so Marcus, thank you again for joining us, dude. This has been such a pleasure. I feel bad for Vince having to edit this episode because we had so much great shit we talked about.
Yeah.
Thank you for all you're doing in DC. We're gonna be following you. We'll check back in with you also. You know, on the other side of it, maybe just in 30
Hopefully.
something days or whatever. Let's just see see how things have changed, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully on the other side of it, right?
Right. Emergency is supposed to end this week. And so, you know, it's who knows what's going to happen on the other side of this. There's going to be a lot of work to be done. Clearly, Republicans in Congress are not going to stop their onslaught on DC, but it also seems clear that they're ready to move this. They're ready to take this show on the road. So while it might be some other side for DC, I know we'll all be standing in solidarity together. You know, I'm sure as it
Oh
comes
yeah.
to a community near us. Yeah.
Yeah, and cities like Denver, like the one I live in, are going to be looking to y'all for playbooks, for guidance, for advice, for inspiration. So, I think it's going to be useful for every blue city to be paying attention to what's happening in LA and DC and showing up in kind, right? Like this was going to take. So thanks again for joining us. I'm going to give you guys just a quick overview of what we learned here today, because I think, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of not knowing how we need to be involved. And we keep hearing platitudes like get involved, get active, organize, do something, right? So I think what we've learned from Marcus today, which is really valuable, is that it doesn't matter which of those two things you choose. Just do what you know you can do. Do what feels right for how you can contribute. I've started a lot of businesses. Naturally, I am the person who creates the idea and leads it. But the way that I've been involved in protests has actually been a very quiet activist. Like I help, I play a support role at protests, or I go to learn and listen to leaders when I'm involved in active movements. So, there's just going to be a way that you feel comfortable, and there's going to be things that you want to do. Find those things. Understand that organization does not mean starting a political party or action committee or a massive thing, right? It can mean literally just collecting a few people from your block and having a sit down conversation about what you can do as a community, how you might be able to help protect your undocumented neighbors, how you might be able to show up when, people like feds are trying to show up on your street. Maybe you try to block the street with your cars, right? Like have a plan, But organizing means something very, very small sometimes. You know, it can mean doing something on Reddit if you're unable to actually physically be at any protests. But it means doing something with your community, with people, communicating, learning, and in some cases, you know, putting together a lot of people to plan a protest, to plan a, you know, engagement with your representatives, right? That's the other thing I think we learned here is engage with your local representatives. Make sure your mayor, your city council, your state representatives are hearing from you all the time about what you expect from them. Because the DNC is only going to do as much as they need to make you feel like they're on your side, right? So force them further, right? Be loud, be active, make them understand they will not win their reelection if they don't stand up right now and do what we need them to do right now. I think that's going to be one of the most important things. And then I think lastly, you know, nonviolent protest has worked against fascism historically as far back as we want to look. There is a place for armed resistance. And if that's where you feel compelled, there are places you can go find online. Just do the research. But really, I think on the front line, when we are dealing with guard deployments in our cities, we have to remember that they are looking for us to be hyper violent. They are looking for that footage that they can say, look at the riots like they did during the BLM uprising, right? Remember the George Floyd uprisings and how they characterized every blue city as being in full on crime riot, you know, like they made it sound like Judgment Day in blue cities. And if you were there at the time, you know how nonviolent we were being. And how it was being manipulated in the media. So keep that in mind when you're out there on the streets. And if you want to do some gangster shit, don't be talking about it. Don't be out in front of any cameras, right? Like, let's just understand that the implicit threat that we will defend ourselves sometimes is all it takes. And really, what we need to understand is that the lesson we learned from the Edmund Pettus Bridge protest with MLK and all of those activists, that if we remain nonviolent in the face of violence, it makes that violence intolerable. And that's one of the major cruxes to what changed the tide of the Jim Crow era to where, you know, we got to, which isn't the best place, but way better than where we were then. And hopefully at the end of this, we'll be way better than where we were today. So thank you, everybody, for listening and for watching Find the Helpers. Please check us out on yellowscene.com. Contribute on the links below in the show notes. And follow Markus. He's doing some great stuff in D.C.
You can follow me at Markus, Markus 4 FORDC on all platforms. And also, please follow my organization, People for the American Way, at People for FOR.
Maybe one day he might run for election again, right, Markus? Is that going to happen?
Maybe. I got one more in me, I think. We'll see.
You got one more in you? All right. All right. So if that happens, make sure you're supporting Markus and telling all the people out there to vote for him because he's one of the helpers that we need to highlight the most. All right. So for Find the Helpers Pod, I am your host, Brad.
And I am Christian Campbell.
And we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, Markus.
Find the Helpers Pod is a production for Yellow Scene Magazine. Our executive producer is Vince Chandler. Our hosts are Christian Campbell and Brad Bogus. And our music is by Mark Wilson X. Don't forget to share this episode.